გამარჯობა ბატონებო, დღეს გრძელდება ჩვენი შეხვედრები, ესეთ კვირიანი შეხვედრები. უკვე მეორე მოხსენება იქნება, რომელიც არის მიწვნილი არქიტექტურასთან დაკავშირებულ პრობლემებთან. ესე იგი არის პირველი იყო ქალბატონ ილიაუნის ილიას უნივერსიტეტიდან და დღეს იქნება მოხსენება პროფესორ უოლშის, რომელიც არის დეკანი სან-დიეგოს უნივერსიტეტის თბილისის განყოფილების. მე მინდა სანამ გადავიდოდით უშუალოდ მოხსენებაზე, მე მინდოდა მეთხოვა ორი სიტყვა ქალბატონ ირინა დარჩიასგან, რომელიც წარმოადგენს განათლების სამინისტროს. ქალბატონ ირინა,
ძალიან დიდი მადლობა. მოგესალმებით კიდევ ერთხელ. ჩემთვის ძალიან დიდი პატივია მოგესალმოთ საქართველოს განათლებისა და მეცნიერების სამინისტროს სახელით, რომელიც გახლავთ მეცნიერებისა და ინოვაციების პირველი საერთაშორისო კვირეულის იდეის ავტორი და ინიციატორი, თორემ ორგანიზატორი არის დღეს უკვე მთელი საქართველო. მათ შორის გახლავთ ილიას სახელმწიფო უნივერსიტეტი, რომელსაც მინდა დიდი მადლობა გადაუხადო ძალიან აქტიური ჩართულობისთვის, ძალიან საინტერესო გამორჩეულად კარგი ღონისძიებებისთვის და აი ამ არაჩვეულებრივი სამეცნიერო კაფესთვის. მე აპირულად არა ვარ, მიუხედავად იმისა, რომ 120-ზე მეტი ღონისძიება გვაქვს ამ ერთი კვირის განმავლობაში. მთელი საქართველოს მასშტაბით მე შევძელი რომ უკვე მეოდე შემესწრები სამეცნიერო კაფეს და ძალიან მიხარია რომ ხედავ ახალგაზრდების ჩართულობას და ახალგაზრდებს ხედავ ჩვენს გვერდით. მე განსაკუთრებით მინდა მივესალმო სან-დიეგოს უნივერსიტეტის წარმომადგენლებს და ძალიან მოხარული ვარ რომ ჩვენი თანამშრომლობა სახელმწიფოს და სამინისტროს თანამშრომლობა სან-დიეგოს უნივერსიტეტთან გრძელდება, ისინი აქტიურად არიან ჩართულები ჩვენს კვირეულში. მე განსაკუთრებით მინდა მივესალმო ბატონ უოლშს, რომელმაც გამონახა დრო და ამ ილიაუნის სამეცნიერო კაფის ფარგლებში წარმოადგენს თავის მოხსენებას. დაგვრჩა სულ რაღაც ერთი დღე, დღეს არის დღევანდელი დღის ერთ-ერთი ბოლო ღონისძიება. ხვალ უკვე საზეიმოდ დავხურავთ მეცნიერებისა და ინოვაციების კვირეულს და ყველა თქვენგანს ილიას სახელმწიფო უნივერსიტეტს, დამსწრეს, ასევე სან-დიეგოს უნივერსიტეტს ვეპატიჟებით უკვე მომავალ წელს მეცნიერებისა და ინოვაციების ფესტივალში მონაწილეობის მისაღებად. ძალიან დიდი მადლობა.
Thank you very much for coming tonight. I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about my own discipline today. I have spent a lot of time over the last year talking about San Diego State University, Georgia, and that's something that I know a lot about and I am very passionate about. But it's fun to have an opportunity to talk about construction engineering for an evening. And so thank you very much for coming. I want to recognize two unique guests. We have a number of officials here today, and they actually had the chance to speak here at the beginning, and so thank you very much to the representatives of the ministry and from Ilia State for coming today. But there's two people I really want, or two entities I really want to recognize today, and those are the students of San Diego State University, Georgia, because we've been dreaming about this project for a long time, and it's really exciting that today we actually have SDSU Georgia students, like living, breathing human beings, and many of them taking the opportunity to come tonight. So if you are a student, would you stand up briefly, please? So thank you very much. You can sit there. And then the other person I really want to recognize today, well actually there's two more now that I think about it. We are very fortunate to have a guest from San Diego visiting all the way from San Diego today. Dean Monty Marabati is the Dean of the College of Engineering in San Diego and is visiting today and was my former boss, so please be really nice to him. And I also want to recognize my colleague from the SDSU Georgia office, Vice Dean Dr. Halil Guven, because I understand it's your birthday. Oh. Yeah, so enough of that. I will be talking today a little bit about the construction industry. It's a very unique industry in the sense that we all feel like we know about it, a lot about it. We see construction going on all the time. And there are behaviors in the industry that don't seem to make any sense from the outside. And I'm going to take a few minutes tonight just to show you that if you really understand what's occurring, you can actually make sense out of the industry. So before I go on, we should really talk about the construction industry. And so I always like to make sure we all know what we're talking about. And in this case, what do I mean by construction? And if you look in the dictionary, you get this: making or forming by combining parts. That's what's in the dictionary for the word construction. I hate this definition. This is a really boring definition on the one hand, and also it carries with this implication that construction is something like this, right? You've perhaps gotten something from IKEA, and it always comes with these cryptic instructions. Like you could buy the plans for a building and it would tell you it's got 4 walls and a roof. And my favorite part of this is 7,450 little wooden dowels. And from that you're going to make this building, right? So I'm not crazy about that particular definition. And I prefer to think of the construction industry as a unique and very complex form of production. Now, human beings have been producing things for centuries. But in the construction industry, our production is quite unique. I'm going to explain why. But I think it's characterized by just a few things. First off, what we call single-piece production. In the manufacturing industry, we produce millions of copies of things. And so that produces a certain sort of form of production, a certain set of math about how you could characterize the production. And I'll come back to single-piece production in a little bit. It is often a purely price-driven competition. And there are very few things in human experience where we use purely price-driven competition. For example, anybody in the room ever had brain surgery? Okay, imagine that you're going to have brain surgery. Are you going to choose the least expensive brain surgeon you can find? Right? When you go to the store, generally speaking, you are not looking for the least, especially the ladies in the room, you're not looking for the least expensive pair of shoes in the store most of the time, right? So there's very few things that are 100% price driven, especially things that are complex, single price or single piece production. We very rarely buy those for the least cost. But in the construction industry, generally speaking, that's almost how it works. This is something I'm going to come back to. It's an industry that's characterized by high risk, by very different cultures in terms of how the industry works in different places, and by a very peculiar thing that there are new sets of machines every time we sit down to a project. Now I'm going to talk about the bottom ones here in some more length, but most of our time today is going to be an audience participation experiment, and it'll be focused on this price-driven competition. So just be ready for the fact that you're going to be involved at some point shortly. Okay, I said that this is an industry that is driven by several things, and one of them I mentioned was high risk. There's a lot of different kinds of risk in the construction industry. This is a photo taken over Vake from this is a photo that all of us could probably imagine where I got this. It happens to be from my balcony, but you can see there's lots of construction going on up and down Chevchavadze, right? So many projects underway at the same time. And we can see examples of what I mean by risk just right here. So if I blow up there on the right, on the left-hand side, there's this sort of hulking concrete and steel building that kind of leans or maybe droops over Chevchavadze Avenue and seems to have been sitting there for several years and is now completely abandoned. This is a project that fell victim to financial risk. And the business case for this project no longer made sense, and so partway through the construction it was abandoned. This is a risk because the contractors involved lose money when that happens. Because the construction workers involved lose employment when that happens. And Tbilisi is gifted with the beautiful bones of this abandoned mastodon, right, that kind of hulked over the city. So that's one kind of risk. In the construction industry, people lose money, lose their employment, and can lose their livelihoods. There's another kind of risk that I would point out here. If you look closely at the Axis Tower which is, you see posters for this twisty building. That's it, the high building kind of in the middle. And so if I zoom in a little bit, you can see the crane up at the top. And right there in the very middle, you can see that little speck. And that's a construction worker. And he's standing out at the edge of the highest platform, working on building the formwork. Concrete will be placed. And there's really nothing aside from his wits to keep him from falling off. And this photo was taken last week when the wind was howling at 60 or 65 kilometers an hour from time to time, and it was raining, and he's standing on a slippery steel surface. This is a bad idea, right? So the construction industry, unfortunately, is a place where we not only have financial risk is bad, but we also place our workers in physical risk. People die in this industry, and here's an example of why. This kind of thing is avoidable. And we do things like this. So this is a building across the street from me. The workers here are involved in cleaning the facade. And you can see they're in these little scaffolds that are hung from the ceiling. And they're individually controlled by a winch on each end. So when they wanted to change the position, you can see the one in the middle, they lower one end, and then they hang on desperately and climb up to the other end, and then lower that end. And it's not a matter of if a worker is going to fall off something like this, it's just a matter of when. Sooner or later somebody will make a bad decision in this environment and they will fall. He happened to be on about the 15th floor. So I think you can probably guess what would happen were he to lose his grip on that rickety wooden scaffold. So it's an industry with a lot of risks. It's an industry where a lot of things can go wrong, and when things go wrong in the construction industry, people lose jobs, people lose money, and people can lose their lives. It's also an industry where we see big cultural differences in construction practices. And I'm going to show you just one example here. This is a building that's under construction, that was under construction last time I was in San Diego, downtown San Diego. It's a very typical high-rise concrete building, much like what we would build here in Tbilisi. But I want you to notice an important difference. I'm going to try to point it out. So if we zoom into this building that's under construction, you can begin to see a little bit of it. Up at the top, you'll see the construction formwork for where the concrete's going to be placed next. And then there's some support under that. But if we zoom in down on the bottom, if you look closely, you can start to see some steel framework. In fact, if you go up to the top of this building and you look down from a neighboring building, this is what it looks like, right? Hardcore concrete construction going on that uppermost portion. If I come down a little bit, come down a floor, it looks like this. There's some bracing and so forth to hold up the concrete at the top. Come down just a little bit lower, that bracing is beginning to be removed, and you can see they're beginning to install piping. And the pipes have to go in first because it's very, very important that especially your sewers are at the right slope because you really want them to drain, right? And then after those pipes are in, they begin putting in the walls. So if you get down to a lower floor, you can see the steel walls are being framed. And if you go down a little bit further, they're beginning to put stuff inside the wall. Insulation, electrical, and so on, is starting to go inside the wall. And if you get down low enough, if you get down about 8 or so floors below where they're placing concrete, you can see they're actually putting the drywall on and starting to make it look like a real room, right? So this is over a distance of 8 to 10 floors. If you go up to the top of the building, it looks like the photo at the top. If you walk down 10 floors, it looks like that. We call this the construction train. So as the building gets built, there's the engine up at the top for the concrete being placed, and then there's all these cars behind of all these other trades doing their work. And as the building goes upward, the train goes up, right? So the machines move to where the work is, and the building gets built. Now I'm going to go back. This is that access tower under construction. And you can see all the way through the building on all of those floors. And there's no work going on other than the concrete construction up at the top. And in fact, if you look around at construction practices around the city, high-rise buildings work like this. The buildings are built, and then they start coming in and doing some of these other services. And you can imagine that adds months or years to the total cycle time to get the building built. It's just a difference in the culture in terms of how the construction is approached. By the way, so is the safety culture. If you look at the structure on the left-hand side, you will have noticed that there was that the construction workers, typical worker outfitted down here at the bottom, orange reflective vests so they can be seen, hard hats, steel safety-toed boots, long sleeves, and so forth. When I've had the opportunity to walk past a lot of construction sites here in Georgia, I'm always pleased when I see that the workers have, shoes. So just a very different culture in terms of what's acceptable on the construction site. And another thing that I mentioned was just that every construction site, think about the manufacturing process. We optimize how we're going to manufacture a car. We have a long string of machines. The car moves through those machines on the assembly line, and they're optimized to make that car, which is a complex product. In the construction industry, if you think about the way we just described the building, the machines move through the pieces rather than the pieces moving down from machine to machine. But it's the same concept with one important difference. Every project is a new combination of players. There's a general contractor who sort of runs the project, and then they'll have specialty subcontractors who come in and do certain pieces of it. So you might have one subcontractor who does the electrical work, and a different subcontractor who does the plumbing, and so on. And it's very rare for that same exact team to work every time. So now try to imagine making a car. You're only going to make one. You're going to do it with a completely new set of machines, with new people every time, and you're going to do it to a completely unique design for each person. How much would our cars cost if we did it that way? Now there's good reasons for this. The foundations are different at every place, the needs of the owner are different at every location, but it is a very complicated form of production. Now, you may be thinking this, wait a minute, Professor Boy. We've been building stuff for a long time, right? There are pyramids, there's the Great Wall of China, Gothic cathedrals, very complicated structures. The Panama Canal. We built amazing things for centuries, and we didn't need you spouting off at us about math. And yes, that's true, but the way these projects were built is that we tried to build them, and if they didn't work, they fell down. And we shrugged and we made them again bigger. That's the way design occurred. Now, we feel like we can't afford to do that. So we want to try to get it right on paper first. It's a different world, and that means we have to have the kinds of tools to understand the process. So just really briefly to touch on the manufacturing process. This is the way we think of the manufacturing process. We have a machine. There's some things that come into that machine. While it's inside the machine, we call it work in progress. And then stuff comes out the other side. So, for example, the units in might be steel and tires and windshields and batteries. And then you have a bunch of cars that are being made inside a factory. And then you have cars coming out the other side, right? And pretty much, conservation of mass tells us that whatever goes in has to come out as a car, right? Otherwise, parts are building up somewhere or being created out of nothing someplace. And so this has to be balanced. And however long it's going to take in between, the units that are coming out on the right-hand side, the units coming in on the left-hand side, the space in between is the cycle time to get the thing built. And the expensive part is what we call WIP, or work in progress. So we can very simply describe a manufacturing process like this, and we can spend a lot of money to get this very optimized. The less work in progress there is, the more money we make, the less of our capital it takes to sell things. It's a very simplified depiction of the manufacturing industry. But construction doesn't work like that, unfortunately. This is nice because the math is so easy. There's a really simple relationship between cycle time, throughput, and work in progress. And I can time my machines and everything to make it so I'm going to make money. Construction industry doesn't work like that. If we just said for the moment, let's look at the inputs and the outputs. In the industry, we can get stuff to the construction industry very fast, which means that slope tends to be pretty high. And then the construction of the building is slower, so the output is fairly slow. So it's that difference in slope that you see between the two lines. And furthermore, at some point we finish the building. We're only going to make one. It doesn't go on forever. And so, as a result of this, the equation for the cycle time is more complicated. And the equations for everything else turn out to be more complicated. And what's worse, in the construction industry, it's very nonlinear. Almost everything that's simple gets to the site quickly. Then all the expensive stuff, like the fancy 46-inch LED TVs and stuff, right? That stuff comes at the very end. It's much slower and difficult to get. And the output, we can get the foundations and stuff in fairly quickly, but all the finishes happen at the end. So they're very nonlinear. And what that means is that the math turns out to be pretty complicated by comparison to the manufacturing environment. And we've been producing things in a manufacturing setting for a lot longer. Okay, so what I hope that I've been able to convince you of today is that the industry is complicated and it has a lot of fairly unique characteristics. And so what? So maybe we knew that. So what I'm going to try to do today is to involve you in an experiment. Remember I told you that what I really wanted to focus on is this pure price competition, which we are convinced is the best way to buy construction. And I just want you to see the behaviors that creates, and then we'll go back and look at it again. So to do that, I'm going to ask you all to participate in an experiment. It's a very simple experiment. I'm going to ask you to break into pairs, and we're going to give you 10 cards. And I'm going to ask you to build this with those 10 cards. Okay? So you're going to be given 10 cards. You just have to get them laid out like this. So, in effect, this represents the plans for what we're going to build today. Right? This is the plans. It's a very simple structure, yes? Yeah. So they're going to end up lying face down on your lap, on a chair, on the floor, something like that. You just want to end up with them laid out like that. And in construction, we also have a lot of rules for how you can build. We call those specifications because we have to have special, fancy, scary names, but they're just rules. So we have to have rules for this too. And the rules for the way we're going to do this are that you're going to start with your cards, and you're going to mix them all up. You have to shuffle them. So we'll mix them all up without looking. Okay, so you mix them all up, and then holding them face down so you can't see them, you're going to deal them out one card at a time. Okay, so that's the first rule, one card at a time. Now you can start anywhere in that thing, 6 through ace, anywhere you want. It doesn't have to be this, you don't have to start with 6, you can start anywhere in our little picture. But once you've played a card, any card you play next must be adjacent to a card that's already there. Okay? So for example, let's suppose we started with the 6. You don't have to start with the 6. You can start with whatever this card is. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, we started with the 6. Okay? So if that's the card that's in play, our next card can only be the 7 or the 9. Because those are the only two cards that are next to the 6. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay, I've been bragging on SDSU Georgia students all over town, and I'm hoping that they can keep track of the complexity of 7 and 9 are next to 6 here. So yeah? Okay, good. Because these other cards, they are not next to the 6, right? And I just want to point out, you see the 6 and the 10? Corners don't count. So it's got to be alongside. Now once I had played the 7, I could play the 9 or the 10 or the 8, but not the jack. Got it? It just have to be next to a card that's already there. Does that make sense? Good.
Excuse me. So I need next to cards, right? If I have 6 and 7, they can do it.
If you have the 6 and the 7, then if your next card's a 10, you're good to go. I'm going to do it. You'll see. Okay? There's one more thing. In the construction industry, things cost money, right? The whole idea is to make money. So we're just going to keep things simple. The way that we keep track of how much it all costs is anytime you move a card It costs 1 lari. I'll let you do this secretly at first. Okay, so it costs 1 lari. Not really, but just keep track. So what does it mean to move a card? Well, it either means to build. So by build, I mean I say, I have to decide before I know what the card is. And I'm going to say, build. Then I'm going to turn the card over and I'm going to put it right into the project. I'm going to build, right? That costs 1 lari. Now maybe I'm not sure it's going to work. So I can plan. I can set it off to the side, turn it over, and see what it is. So I have to say before I know what it is, build or plan. So if I say plan, I turn it over and I set it off over here, and I can see it. And then anytime I want to, I can take it from there and build with it, right? So 1 lari. Anytime later that I want, 1 lari to move it into the project. Make sense? Or there's one more option, and that is what in English we call an oops. And I'm told in Georgian, ui. It just doesn't work, right? It just doesn't work. Now, why might it not work? This is a question for you. Why might it not work? I try to build, and it won't go. Why not? Why isn't it appropriate? Right, so it's this whole thing I was just talking about before. I've played the 6. I decide on the gunslinger I'm going to build. I go to play the jack. Oh, it won't go. Cost me a lari to try to build. And now I have to move it out of the way, which costs me another lari. And then at any point I want to, I can bring it back. And that will cost me a lari, right? So anything you do costs a lari. If you do something, it costs a lari. If you don't do anything, it doesn't cost you anything. But you don't get the project built. Okay? So we're going to hand out a stack of cards to each pair of you. And what I'm going to ask you to do, oh, there's one more reason it could be an oops. Do you remember I told you that I'm going to give you 10 cards?
There's 9.
And there's 9 that go in there. So before you do anything, I want you to look at the deck of cards we're going to give you. There's going to be one that's the wrong color. So you might have all red cards and there'll be one black card. That card is ui. Okay? So, if you try to build with it and it won't go, or if you plan with it and it won't go, once it's out of the way, it's out of the way. Alright? Okay, so I'm gonna try to do this. I'm gonna try to do this. I'm gonna come into the middle. So, first I'm gonna mix them up. I want you to keep track. Every time I move a card, you say 1, and the next time 2 and 3, and you count. You are an SDSU Georgia student, you can count. Okay. Alright, so ready? So you can see how this is going to work. So, Bill.
1.
Okay, 1. So, that's making me nervous. I just think I need to be a little bit cautious, so I'm going to plan.
2.
Say it loud.
2.
Good, thank you. And, oh, I can now take that.
Yeah.
3.
3, right? I moved it. 3, okay?
So you kind of move.
Yeah. So anytime I move a card, that costs 1. Alright, so now I'm just feeling good. Did you see how I pulled out a card and it was the right card and everything was good? So I'm just going to go. I'm just going to build, because that's how I am. Queen. So that was 4. And? 5. Ui, 5. So, but it can't possibly happen again. Let's take a risk. What do you think? Yeah. King.
6.
6.
7.
Maybe I should plan.
8.
Now that was my ui. Right? That's the black card. So now we can go. I can feel it.
10.
11. And now let's see. Let's get some stuff cleaned up here. So the 12.
12, yeah.
13. 14. 15. Build. 16. 17. Boom. Now. So I'm going to ask you to do that. We're going to give the cards to you in pairs. So if it's your turn, then you would have, like Emin would be counting just like he did. So if she's your partner, you announce, you count.
Okay.
Then you trade.
Okay.
She announces, you count. Got it? And keep going. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to do that. One of you play, the other one count. Then switch. As soon as you finish, call out to me what you got. Right? So what did I get? 17. Just give me a loud 17. Make sure I heard it. And then switch and keep going. Keep going. I will tell you when to stop. I want you to do it several times. Okay. So, since I put you on the spot, well, you got a deck. Okay, do you have one yet?
Partner?
There you go.
12. Tell me your numbers as you have them.
Estão lixados.
Number 6 report.
Are you planning or?
No.
What? Who got 9? And you sure you counted it right? We have a gift. That's a very well done. We got 9 over here. 9 over here. Very nice. What'd you get? No, you have to tell me. 16?
These guys have 11. Although they might achieve.
13. Okay, come on back. Got it?
12. It's in here as well.
Okay? Alright. So, let me tell you what I've been doing with these results along the way. So what I tried to do... Okay, so all the way along here, what I was trying to do was to just keep a tick mark for every number that I heard. And I tried to make them all kind of the same height. So now that you've had a chance to work on it, what's the absolute minimum it could cost? $9 or 9 lari, right? 9 lari. And we actually had one of those over here someplace. Okay? I have to tell you, I learned this simulation at a conference of construction educators in San Diego, oddly enough. I wasn't working at San Diego State at the time, but that's where I first encountered the game. And I was super excited. I came running upstairs to the hotel room because San Diego is a beautiful place. My wife had come to the conference with me, and I was like, you have to see this amazing game. And I bought a deck of cards in the gift shop, and I showed her how it worked. And she looked at me kind of quizzically, and she, okay, I'll play. And she went build, 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 build. 9. And she's never done it again since. Right? That's the beauty of women, I think. So, anyway, what I was trying to do is to just try to keep track. 9 is unlikely, right? Because to get a 9, you have to be willing to take a risk on every single time, and it has to work out every single time, and the odds aren't great. By the way, I could see you learning along the way. I could see early on, I got a few more high scores, but then later people started saying, well, I've got some in the middle here. There's fewer cards that are a bad card now, less ooies in the deck, so I can take more risk. In fact, I heard a conversation just like that. Ooh, the odds are good for me now, so I'm just gonna go, right? So, like construction managers, you learn to take calculated risks. But you can see, by the way, what is this?
Bell curve.
Say it again.
Bell curve.
It's a bell curve, yeah, exactly. So I know that if I've done this, by the way, with everybody from kindergarten children all the way up through a group of PhDs. strangely enough, the group of PhDs took about 3 hours to play the game, and their average was up about 19. That tells you something. But pulling all of it together over a very long period of time, there's a bell curve that looks something like that. Typically with an average of about 15.5. Okay? Now it costs $9 to build it, right? So we know on average it's going to work out to cost us $15.5. That's because the construction contractors are gouging us, right? Why does the contractor want to charge us 15.5 lari for something we can buy for 9 lari? Because there are risks and because the process takes management, right? But the industry doesn't work this way, does it? Generally speaking, contractors don't get to build it and then tell you how much it cost, right? It's not how it works. We bid it up front. So to really understand the way the industry works, that's what we have to do today. You've now become experienced contractors. You have built this building several times in a row. You know a lot about how it works. So we're going to have to bid. Now, in the construction industry, we have very formalized processes of doing this to make it fair. We share the plans with everybody. They have time to review them. Everybody turns in a sealed bid so that we're not driven by the... We don't have time for all that today. So we're just going to do it by reverse auction. Okay? So, who will build this for me for 24 lari? Why won't everybody? Come on now. 24 lari. 24 lari. Okay. So I have too many bidders at that price. Who will build it for me for 23 lari? And more. Odd. Okay. How about 22 lari? All right, let's make bigger jumps. 20. Who will build it for me for 20 lari? 20 lari. Somebody will do it. 18 lari. Who's going to build it for me for 18 lari? 16 lari. Who will do it for 16 lari? Now people start to look nervous. How about 15? Will somebody build it for me for 15 lari in the back? Great. 14. 14 lari. 14 lari still. Will somebody build it for me for 13 lari? How about 12? Will anybody do it for 12? Okay. 12. We got a 12. Anybody for 11? Will somebody build this for me for 11 lari? I still have 2. 10. Will somebody build it for me for 10 lari? Okay. Come on up. Count out 10 of those. Now, I know that you're a starving college student and all that stuff, so I'm going to capitalize your company.
Okay.
I'm going to capitalize your company. Here are 10 lari. Here are 10 lari. And no, that's not the way the industry works. And every time that we do something here, I have a specially sorted, mechanically randomized deck of cards, so I don't have to worry about anybody cheating with it. And in this deck, I made myself a note. In this deck, Uli Shavia. Okay. Alright, so ready? So, come here. I want you to sit right there. Bring a chair. So every time he wants to do something, he's got to give you a lari.
Okay.
So you're going to tell me what you do, and we'll either do it. So build or plan. What's it going to be? Plan?
Oh, better.
Okay, did you give her a lari?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mama needs new shoes.
Plan?
Yeah. Beat.
Build?
Build. Yeah. Build. Build. Build.
Wait a minute, hold on.
Yeah.
Wow. You said build?
Yeah.
Did he give you a lari for that?
I give.
So we're
Oh, you got to take it out.
Yeah.
So that's a new one.
Yeah, I have to give it one more, right? Yeah.
Right.
Build.
okay.
Build. That's another ooey.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Build. So the 6. That's another ooey.
Build.
I think he's out.
Okay. Now it's time to do something. Like coming.
That was pretty good. It's very impressive.
What's up?
And it,
You're bankrupt.
So he's bankrupt. Want to see what's really amazing? Build one more time.
Build.
It's another oops, right? This particular deck had 2, which is totally unfair. Now, in some ways, the experiments that we've just done are sort of like the real world. Okay? Sort of like the real world. When we build something, we have rules that we have to comply with, just like in the real world. There's a consequence for making a mistake. Planning. Hey, wow. Planning has a cost and a benefit in this environment. There are some things, though, that are different from the real world. Can anybody think of any differences between the things that we've been building and the real world? The real world costs more. Yes, true.
More risks.
There are more risks, right? So here we know exactly what the consequences of a mistake are. Sometimes in the construction industry we make a mistake and it doesn't cost us anything because we can fix it. Sometimes the project goes completely bankrupt over one small mistake. We don't know, right? And furthermore, there's a very limited number of things that can go wrong in this project. It won't fit, or it's a black card in a red deck. That's it. A construction site next to a project that I worked on as a young engineer was a big apartment complex that was all being built out of wood. It got hit by lightning one night and the whole thing burned to the ground. I always picture the construction manager showing up at work the next day. You know, he left the project and it looked almost like a set of apartments. He comes in the next day and there was nothing there. What happened, right? No one expected that project to get hit by lightning. So in this case, very limited environment. But one thing that was common to the construction industry, why you knew, we had all these statistics. I told you that I've been doing this for over 15 years, and the average is about 15 and a half. Why did you bid 10?
Just for because it was cheap. That's all. 10.
Because you knew you could do it for 9, right?
No.
Why?
I thought it was only written 10, the last one.
Yeah.
Yeah, 10, and this was the last price, so I wanted that and just took 10.
But you knew it was going to cost 15 and a half.
Yeah.
So why would you take it for 10?
Because he feels himself lucky.
Yes. And we feel this way. Look, when we open all these sealed bids from different contractors, they're all going to make the building out of the same stuff. They all know how many windows, how many doors, how many blocks. That stuff has a certain cost. Where do they go to figure out a way to do it cheaper than somebody else?
Yeah.
They can assume that they're going to plan better, so that they can do it with better planning. Or they can assume they're going to be lucky. Who's going to win the bid? The least expensive contractor. That's the contractor who's decided up front they're going to be the luckiest, best, least planner. Because the planning is expensive and anything that goes wrong is expensive. Interestingly, I told you I've done this with everybody from kindergartners up to PhDs. I was doing this in a first grade classroom one time. And I was watching a little set of kids trying to do it, and one little boy just got so frustrated, he ripped the cards out of his friend's hand. And he said, "You have to let me do this. All this planning is costing us too much money." That very morning, I had been doing some consulting for a construction company. I was watching a discussion between the superintendent and the foreman and the project manager and a representative of the owner, and they were screaming at each other about how much it was all costing. And the foreman at one point said, "We have to stop having all these meetings. These meetings are costing us too much money." It was exactly the same behavior that I could see with the game in a first grade classroom, right? Why is it that we expect that we find the person who's decided that they're going to be the luckiest in the world, and they're going to plan better with less time than anybody else in the world, and we say, yes, you get to build my special building, and we think it's going to, we think it's going to turn out right. Right? Why is there cost overrun in the construction industry? Because stuff like this is the way the industry works. You're looking for something we've never built before, that's built to very exacting standards, that is a very complex thing, and we're going to build it under those parameters. We shouldn't be surprised when it doesn't turn out the way we expect, right? So, if you spend a little time with the mathematics and the underlying physics, and in this case the underlying psychology, you can come to understand behaviors that from the outside look perplexing. We either say, that contractor is trying to fleece me because he's charging me 15.5 lari for something that could cost 9, or we're hiring somebody to build it for us for 10, knowing perfectly well they're going to fail. And then when they fail, they're not going to just meekly walk off and do a magic trick. Right? We're all going to get into arguments with each other. We're all going to take it to the judge. We're going to spend a lot of money on attorneys. And they're the ones who are going to make money.
Yeah.
That's the way the industry works. So, how do you make money in the construction industry? You have to find a better way to do it than anybody else.
Or better way to sue.
Or a better way to sue. No, you have to find a better way to do it than anybody else. And you have to understand the underlying principles of what's going on better than anybody else. And if you can do those things, it can be a very lucrative and interesting industry. So, that's what I have for today. I really want to thank everybody. If you have more questions or anything, I'm happy to take them. Yeah?
Why there were 2 A's in this?
Because. Because we'd all gotten built around the idea.
Delightful. Unexpected.
Yes, there's always something unexpected.
Yeah.
That's right. Yes?
Ken, do you have an idea of a better way of going through the whole bidding process than this? If you think this is so flawed?
Yes. So there are a lot of different methods out there to try to make it not a purely price-based competition. Interestingly enough, governments are almost always precluded from using those methods. And it's governments that build the most complicated stuff. Ever since the Panama Canal, the really big complicated things in the world tend to be built by governments. And they're the ones who have to choose the least expensive contractor. Companies usually will pick a contractor that they know can do the job and then negotiate a fair price. And there are ways of saying, we're going to try to work out your capability of completing the job. And by the way, just one more quick thing. Suppose that we were building this. Suppose we were building something just a little more complicated. If you were doing this building instead of the one you did, you can't start anywhere on this building, can you? If you have to build the first floor before you build the second floor, what would that do? What would that do to your strategy?
More planning.
It increases the value of planning, right? In fact, it makes planning into a near necessity. So on a more complicated project, the prices that we get from contractors tend to be grouped more closely together. There are strategies actually that are used in some places in the EU, for example, where they don't take the low bidder. They take the bidder who's closest to the average. Think about that. That's an interesting way of doing it, because you're getting as close as you can to the real cost by doing that sort of thing. So yeah, there are many strategies that are out there, but governments across the world require us all to use low bid. And in my opinion, we should not be surprised when something terrible happens. Yes?
Aren't you always winner if you are rich, so you can risk more for offering for less price and remove other competitors from the field?
Yeah. So that's an interesting question. And a lot of times people say that the big contractor is the one that will always win. And that's true in the short term. If we look, for example, at the economic crisis, great big multinational companies like Skanska were able to price a lot of small local contractors out of existence through that time period.
You cannot stay rich for a long time.
Right. One of the problems that happens is that the risks in construction are often much larger than the profits. Just one quick example. The Titanic sank because the rivets that were used were of a low quality. They were building Titanic, Britannic, and one other, these three gigantic ships all at the same time. They couldn't get enough steel for the rivets. They went with a low quality of steel for the rivets because they said, well, they're just rivets, what's the big deal? Those rivets got brittle. That's why so many panels broke. That's why we've all seen the movie, right? 5 compartments, okay. 6, it's a mathematical certainty. Yeah. So the Titanic sank. Now, the total cost of the rivets in the entirety of the ship was less than 1% of the cost of the ship. But imagine the cost for the ship sinking.
Right.
Not only the cost of the ship itself, which is now completely gone, but all of the claims and hassle and everything else. White Star Line lost a fortune in canceled bookings. And not to say nothing of the 1,500 people who perished in the chilly Atlantic. So in that case, a shipyard that was pricing out everybody else had such a huge loss that it actually led to the end of the shipyard. So yes, big contractors do have certain advantages and better access to capital, but those advantages don't tend to last forever.
Yeah, but in case of Titanic, you mean that they then spared money for during building the ship?
Yes.
But also a richer actually provider can risk a little bit more, you know? He can
Absolutely.
Lose sometimes.
So it is a truism that in almost every way, being rich is better than not being rich. Yes, sir.
Is there a way to change the kind of government attitude that the lowest bid is always the best? I mean, are there efforts to change that?
There are lots of different new models coming online, and we're starting. Many of them actually are sort of what they call an A plus B, for example. So we take your price, and that's B. But first, we give you a score based on what you think your capabilities are. How many of your last few projects have come in under budget? What's your safety record, et cetera, et cetera. Give that a score. We add the two together to come up with a combined number, and that's how we make our selection. There are a lot of new models out there that people are trying because of this very concern. Yes, sir.
Okay, at the beginning we talked about the way Georgians build the buildings.
Yeah.
And we see that safety is not really good, and basically all this stuff costs the company way less money. So as soon as you start to use higher techniques, more safety for your workers, the price for your product will go higher, which means that the supply curve will go down.
Right.
And as long as your price is higher, the demand curve will also go down, which means that the business isn't going out well.
Yeah.
So what could be the solution to keep the clients with you loyal and also think about safety?
So we have Dean Malloy and Dean Marabati visiting from San Diego. I told you, they're really smart. Right? That's a great question. So unfortunately, you're assuming facts, not in evidence, which is that safety costs us money. In fact, if you can take a little bit of a more global perspective, and perhaps what I should do is try and schedule another lecture to talk just about construction safety. It turns out that having a safe workforce saves you money in the long run. Why? Well, if you have workers that feel confident that when they come to work each morning, they'll get to go home to their families that night, then they're more likely to come to work for you. You're more likely to be willing to make investments in their training. And part of the reason that we see so many work practices in Georgia that don't meet the safety standards that we're used to, say, in the United States, is that there isn't the same level of training of those workers, so the workers are much more interchangeable. But if you can get to an environment where you've got highly trained workers, those workers are an investment. And when you lose one, that's expensive. And furthermore, generally speaking, when someone is killed on a construction site, there's excellent evidence that shows that worker productivity across the site changes irrevocably. Public attitude about the project can be changed. So an apartment complex maybe won't sell as well because people will know someone died in the construction of that building. There are a lot of follow-on effects that drive up the cost, but they're hidden. We all say, well, we can't take care of our workers, it's going to make the building more expensive. But the experience all over the world, whenever countries get to a point where they're wrestling with that problem, is that in fact, it doesn't turn out that way. So people say that quality is free, meaning if you can get the reputation for a high quality product, you'll get more customers, you'll have more demand, you can make more money, it'll make up for the investment in better quality. But worker safety actually makes you money, because you get the best workers preferentially, you can invest in their training, and you can be a more productive contractor in the long run. So it's a false analysis, it's a false trade-off to say I can either be profitable or safe. You can actually do both. And what's interesting is this is an environment where we're bumping up against a moral imperative to make sure, I mean, we have a responsibility when people come onto our job site to at least send them home to their families that night. Right? So it's not just an economic principle, but the economics work out too.
I have another question.
Yes, sir.
So isn't there like worldwide regulations, what's called safety? For example, the coworkers should wear the helmet and stuff. So when the company is building a building without this regulation, isn't that like illegal move? So
you've asked a question that I could get in trouble for saying something very yeah. But let me just say there are no worldwide regulations about that. There are recommended standards that come out from all kinds of international bodies, but until government both enacts those regulations, which in many countries around the world has been done, and begins enforcing them, that's when you begin to see change. And it's always a maturity issue in terms of the way that we look at construction safety. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is actually advantage or motivation of building a house that will stay 300 years over building a house that will stay 30 years?
Good question. God, this is what a great meeting. So this is an interesting question because in the United States we build pretty much disposably, with very few exceptions. You know, I mean, Independence Hall, the White House. We have some buildings that have been around for quite a while, but generally speaking, we use as a design lifetime especially for housing stock. It's common to use 50 years.
Right.
And in Europe, they tend to use a much longer time horizon. Now, the beauty of national borders causes all kinds of problems. But one of the beauties of national borders is that we can try different things in lots of different places. And this is one of those things that it's very difficult to say this is better than that, but it's certainly different. I think there's a lot of evidence, particularly coming out of the architectural community, that suggests that the longer planning horizon and using a longer term lifespan for your design tends to generate more resilient infrastructure in the sense that it's more capable of resisting natural disasters and so on. That it tends to produce a housing infrastructure in particular that's more attractive for a long period of time. One of the problems with the 50-year time horizons that we use in the United States is that after 30 to 40 years, a community tends to head into a slum. So, for example, the community where I went to elementary school, if I go visit it right now, I wouldn't visit it right now, which I guess makes me old. It's one of the many things that makes me old. But it's not my birthday, so I'm not as old as you. But now, on the flip side, what's good about a shorter time horizon is that it's much easier for us to upgrade to things like new infrastructure needs. Like, suddenly we switch from horse-drawn carts to automobiles, and we have much broader access to those automobiles, so we need 7 lanes, and you can't fit 7 lanes in between buildings that have been built to last for 300 years and are only 10 meters apart. It's very difficult to go back and retrofit in gas, electricity, internet, and so on. And so you can see differences in kind of the aesthetics of buildings where you have to go back and retrofit those sorts of infrastructure. So I don't think there's necessarily good or bad about the two, but you do introduce certain challenges with one that you don't have with the other. Also, a 300-year time horizon is more expensive. It's interesting, it's not 6 times more expensive, right? You're going to get 6 times more life out of it, but it's not 6 times more expensive. But it's a great question.
Thank you.
Yes?
Currently in Georgia, it's a big discussion concerning introducing regulation, anti-dumping regulation.
Anti-dumping?
Anti-dumping regulation.
Yeah.
I mean, projects which are financed by government. Do you think it's a good idea?
Yes.
Why I'm asking? Because you can avoid this regulation by giving risks, by penalize those construction companies which did not meet their requirements. That's why I'm asking. It can be regulated and can be avoided, this regulation.
Yeah.
What is in your country? Which one?
So, generally speaking,
excuse me, just for audience, for them, maybe I am a company and I'm going to enter in this market. You know, it's my cost. And it costs me, and it's logical. A company can have such a risk. And what is the solution of this problem?
Yeah, so problems of dumping and entry into markets are probably the most vexing issues that government regulators fix. Because, you know, the prevailing logic is that broad access to markets is good. But on the other hand, maintaining a vibrant internal construction industry is also vital. Because there are certain competencies that you just can't afford to import all the time. And so there's a balance to be struck between openness to invite competition and bring in new technologies and higher quality, and protectionism to make sure that you're maintaining an effective internal competency. So, in my opinion, the right answer is to write your regulations extremely well so that you strike that balance just right. Let me just tell you, speaking from the experience of the United States, we don't have it right. Our market swings wildly for construction between being way too hard to enter, and then there's an overcorrection and we're way too easy to enter for a period of time. It's difficult for multinationals to know for sure what the regulations are going to be at any given time. But the US market is so big that they live with the risk. Georgia's a smaller market, and they have to be more thoughtful and get it right from the very, very beginning. And I don't feel qualified to speak to what the right answer is. But I do think that you have to strike that balance. Yeah, for sure. Okay, I think we probably ought to wind up. I know that we've only got the space for a certain period of time. I'm happy to answer questions about construction until tomorrow morning.
If the students have questions, I think we can maybe reply a couple of...
Yeah, because I know they have to go off and take calculus here shortly.
So what about... Yeah. Thank you very much, Ken. So I think that I will wish that all talks were like this, you know, entertaining and interesting and understandable for people which do very little with the issue, or which did before very little with the issue.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.